Welcome to our AI Unplugged Without Borders video podcast series, part of the Transatlantic AI Exchange. We're kicking off a new era of knowledge sharing with our move to video podcast. Here you will get to hear from experts in a relaxed setup, driving into the nuts and bolts of deep tech and artificial intelligence. Today I met with Nestor at the beautiful Stanford University campus. Nestor Maslej is a research manager at Stanford Institute of Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, in short, HAI. In this position, he managed the AI Index report and the global AI Vibrance tool. In developing tools that track the advancements of AI, Nestor hopes to make the AI space more accessible to policymakers, business leaders, and the overall public. And on that topic, we will have another podcast in the near future. Nestor works on AI, namely the AI Index, and has been cited in newspapers across the globe, including the following list, which is really, really impressive. The New York Times, Financial Times and Bloomberg, the Washington Post, The Guardian, Fox, Al Jazeera, Fortune, Forbes, San Francisco Chronicle, Political, The Register, Der Spiegel, The Verge, IEEE, Spectrum, VentureBeat, and many, many more. And he spent the last 2 weeks actually in New York and Washington, D.C. to pitch and present content of the AI Index report. Nestor's publications have likewise informed AI policymakers worldwide, having been referenced by policymakers in countries such as the United States, Canada, Germany, the United Kingdom, China, Japan, as well as Korea. Now, I am your host, Thomas Neubert, born and raised in Germany, a longtime entrepreneur living here in beautiful Silicon Valley for over 33 years, and I'm the founder of the Transatlantic AI Exchange. With that, welcome to our session, and I'm very much looking forward to chat with Nestor about the AI Index report. Thank you for listening. So, Nestor, thank you very much. Good to see you as always.
Yeah, very happy to be here with you today, Thomas.
And thanks for being back here at the beautiful Stanford campus and the HAI office. We want to talk about the AI Index report. And you are the master of the ceremony. You're the editor-in-chief. I've heard you presenting it now twice over the last 2 weeks, and it is absolutely impressive. So maybe we start with a little bit of a quick introduction of what you do here, what the AI Index is for the listeners here who have not heard or have read the AI Index report. It has been out for, I think, 7 years now.
Yeah. I think this is the 7th edition.
It's, in my opinion, one of the most interesting, in-depth and widely reached reports about artificial intelligence, like a 360 view. So maybe we start with you explaining what it is, and particularly like over the last 2 weeks, where you have been and who was interested in listening to and learning more about the AI Index.
Yeah, I would be very happy to do that. So the AI Index is a report that aims to track, visualize, and distill key information on trends in AI. And I think to kind of put the report into context a little bit for the listeners, it was created in 2017 by a diverse group of AI thought leaders that really came together and understood that AI was going to be a groundbreaking and transformative technology. But these leaders felt that there was a need to develop a tool that could provide an unbiased and quantitative look at what's actually going on with this technology. How is it changing? What are these technologies capable of doing now that they weren't necessarily able to do before? What are some of the policy considerations with these technologies? How are businesses using these technologies? And that's really what the AI Index exists to do. Yeah. And we've been fortunate enough in the time that we've been around since 2017 to have been widely cited by policymakers, by journalists, by business people. When we launched the report this year, we went to New York to do events with JP Morgan, the Council of Foreign Relations. We had media engagements with CBS, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and we then went down to Washington to brief a variety of high-level U.S. policymakers. So the report is fairly widely read, And I think that's a responsibility that we take seriously. We know that I think we're a source that a lot of individuals really rely on to get very good information about what's actually going on in AI. So we work really hard to give our readers data that is accurate and data that tells an interesting story about the evolving landscape.
And over the last 2 weeks, when you presented it, what was their initial feedback? How is it helping a Chase, Morgan Bank or a politician? You said you were in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
What are they trying to get out of this report for themselves?
Well, I mean, I think now there's an understanding that AI is here and that the cat is kind of out of the bag, so to speak. And it's actually very interesting, Thomas, because when I started this job 2.5 years ago, it was before ChatGPT. And we would engage with politicians, we would engage with business people. But when you spoke to them, they kind of had a sense that AI was important, but they also felt that they could put off thinking about it. But then I think ChatGPT was launched, and this really opened a lot of people's eyes to the potential of this technology. And since then, I think there's an understanding from different players of wanting to know how this technology is going to actually affect them. And I mean, the reality with AI is that it's something that's so general purpose that someone in politics is going to have to think about it because, I think there's the protection element. Potentially, if these technologies are used widely, citizens could be harmed in some kind of ways. You want to protect them. At the same time, if your country gets a leg up on AI development, that could have massive impacts for productivity. So you want to craft good regulation to ensure that your country's in a position to be taking advantage of the technology. On the business level, I mean, there's so much data now that suggests that companies that are using AI are being more productive or getting work done a lot quicker. So I think there's a lot of business implications when it comes to thinking about not only what effect does AI have, but how do you use it well? So I'll kind of say in summary that AI is something that really affects a lot of different verticals in society. And I think there's now a recognition that it's here and something has to be done about it. And the report is really a resource that lets these individuals make informed decisions about the technology.
You just said something that reminded me, and I agree with you on the ChatGPT moment, so to speak, right? I had a few AI conferences that I put together in London, in Berlin, in Munich, in Palo Alto in around October 2022. And then ChatGPT for the public, for the masses, kind of hit the wave in like January, February, shortly after. Yeah. And I have to agree with you that the interest level and the sense of urgency and the understanding, maybe not in all its depth, but at least from a generative AI ChatGPT point of view, it was like this explosion of interest.
Unquestionably.
And the last 12 months have been, like crazy. Yeah. I think that's also a reflection that the current report has, literally 500?
Yeah, I think when I started, the first one was 250. Now it's doubled in size. And I think there's a lot of good data in the report. I don't know if there is, data that doesn't need to be there. But it, again, I think reflects the fact that AI is on the minds of a lot of different people, and there's a lot of different ways to be thinking about this technology.
Yeah. So this session, I want to point out a little bit more what is actually covered within the report. I can, for all the listeners here, either video-wise or audio-wise, I can highly encourage to read the report. Maybe you don't have to do it in all its details. I can admit, and Nestor has teased me about this, I was the one last year who read it twice, back to back.
I think probably the only other person who read it front to back other than me and Donna who put the report together.
I'm behind schedule right now, so I'm only halfway through, but before my trip next week, I'm going to finish it.
You'll be flying a little bit the next few days, so you have some downtime on the plane to get through it.
And you and I, we are spending some time together and presenting actually some of the core things in Germany at a few conferences in 2 weeks from now. But having said that, yes, I want to encourage the listeners here to upload the report. It's for free, obviously. There are some very interesting YouTube clips already out there, listening to you with some of the presentations for people who are a little bit more visual oriented than reading a 500-page report. But let's dive into it. What are the chapters on a high level that is being covered within the report? I think the format and the structure of the report is incredible, not only because of the richness of the data. In every of these high-level sectors, you have like the top 10 takeaways, and then you have the top 10 takeaways of the entire report. Maybe you touch on these to get people an idea how interesting and how rich actually this report is.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that a little bit. And I think, again, this reflects what I had said earlier on in the podcast, that there's an understanding that AI is a multifaceted tool, and it's important to look at it from a lot of different perspectives. So we have a chapter on research and development that looks at trends in research, what kind of models are being developed, where are these models coming from, what kind of countries are leading developments. We have a chapter as well on technical performance that I would say is probably one of our most fundamental chapters, that looks at what can this technology do now and how have the capabilities of this technology evolved and changed over time. New addition this year was a chapter on responsible AI that really tries to look at the landscape of responsible AI and how AI is used in responsible settings and what some concerns and considerations are there. We cover economic trends, how businesses are using these tools, what levels of private investment are. We look at education trends, trends in diversity, trends in public opinion as well. And a couple of things to kind of conclude with here. We have a great chapter on policy and governance that looks at how policymakers are thinking about these tools. And I think we have a lot of novel data there that looks at what countries are leading in regulation, what countries are leading in legislation, what kinds of legislations are being passed. And the last thing I'll say on this front is we had a new chapter this year on the ways in which AI is impacting science and medicine. And I think that's a very exciting chapter. And I think was a really interesting one to put together, because even I found myself being surprised. I mean, I'm someone who kind of follows AI very intimately, but it's easy to kind of get lost in the chat GPTs, the GPT-4s and the Claudes. But there is really tremendous work that is being done in the domain of science that is really aided and accelerated by AI. And that chapter really kind of does a deep dive into that.
Okay. So if you take these high-level chapters, what are your personal number one, number two takeaways that even surprised you that is worth highlighting at this point? So yesterday in the presentation, and I think you used it before, you highlighted one of the things, and that was the increase of the concerns of people in the society. Yeah. And the other one is where you have this nice graph where you have the 100% baseline, and then maybe you want to explain that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about in the report, as you alluded to. It's 500 pages, and I wrote it all, so I have to think it's all good. But I'll do the best.
It is.
I'll do the best for the listeners to try to distill what I can, and to kind of try to take away a few high-level points. I think when I think of the technical capabilities, I mean, you follow what's going on in the domain of AI, but it's still kind of surprising to see on a high level how much better the technology has gotten. And you talk about these kind of benchmarks. We track a lot benchmarks in the world of AI. So how much better are AI models doing on certain kind of intellectual tasks? And on a lot of these traditional benchmarks that we track in the AI index report, whether it's for image classification or English language understanding, AI systems have already surpassed the benchmark of a human baseline. Now, I think the story here is not only one of actually surpassing that, but the fact that in the last few years, the pace of gains for a lot of these systems has become massively accelerated. And when you had some of the first benchmarks that were launched a decade ago, like ImageNet, these benchmarks were serving the AI research community for 5-6 years, if not more. It would take a long time for researchers to show improvements on these systems. Whereas now, like I would say one of the hardest benchmarks for these systems at the moment is a benchmark called Math, which is a benchmark for competition level mathematical understanding. AI systems started performing around 5 to 10% in 2021, and now it's all the way up to 90%. So these systems are getting good very quickly. And I think also one thing that I would leave the listeners with is the fact that I think historically AI systems, even 5 years ago, they were good at very narrow tasks. Like you could have an image classifier that could tell you this is a cat, this is a dog. You could have a speech understanding system that could listen and kind of identify what was being said, but you didn't necessarily have an image classification system that could engage in speech modalities and vice versa. But when you think about how humans actually operate and how humans think about different things, they're very flexible and multimodal thinkers. And now you have a lot of these systems like the GPT-4s of the world, Google's Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, that are capable of engaging across various modalities and are able to think about things in very flexible ways. And I think that's something that excites me quite deeply, because I think that is more representative of how actual AI systems work, and how, well, not necessarily how actual AI systems work, but rather how humans think about the world and how humans interact with the world. So that was a really big thing that we saw, and I think that carries with it a lot of implications.
So that slide that you are referring to with, ImageNet being used with a very low baseline for many, many years, if you look at it, and then you look at what happened the last 3-4 years, and you had all these other models and, just hitting the 100% or slowly below. If I fast forward and if I look back to how fast everything has been changed and moved forward within the last 12 months, particularly on generative AI, is it fair to say that it's almost like an exponential curve? In other words, if I sit here with you in 12 months, the whole thing will even change, but exponentially, just not a small step?
Yeah,
which for me is actually hard to believe.
Yeah, I definitely think the pace of improvements are increasing. And I think part of it is now that there's a sense of how to get these systems to be better in a way that does seem to be tangible and realizable. And what I mean by that is, it's now kind of understood. There was this paper that was written a few years ago that talked about the scaling laws. And a lot of these large language models like GPT-4 and Gemini, there's an understanding that when you train these systems on more data, they perform better on a variety of tasks. So a lot of these kind of big companies, that's really what they've been doing. Of course, there have been other developments like RLHF, other algorithmic improvements, but I think at the core, these companies really understand that they can feed these systems more data, and that will drive better performance. And that's really what's being done. So yeah, I do expect that when GPT-5 comes out, or the next version of Claude, or the next version of Gemini, these systems will continue getting better and will continue improving. Whether scaling is a means to actually get AGI or kind of truly flexible and human-like systems, I think you can have a debate about that. And I personally don't believe that just scaling up transformer systems will be enough, but I definitely think that it's reasonable to expect continued performance improvements.
Interesting. Thank you. Shifting gears, going back to this one slide that also caught my attention, and that is the slide that you have per countries where the society expressed concerns. Yeah. And there was this one middle lane where I think Italy was the highest with 24+%. Can you elaborate that a little? Because for me, that was really a big eye-opener.
Yeah, I say so. What you're referring to is that we have data in the report from Ipsos, and Ipsos has done public opinion surveys in 2022 and I believe 2023, where they asked people across the world how they feel about AI. And one of the questions they asked was, do you agree with the statement that products and services using AI make you nervous? And if you compare the rates of nervousness in 2022 before ChatGPT to 2023 after ChatGPT, basically across the board, as you alluded to, for virtually every single country, there has been a massive spike in nervousness. And you see this as well in the American context. Data from Pew suggests that now, for the first time ever, Americans are substantially more nervous and concerned than they are excited about AI technologies. And I think the public opinion element of AI is a very important and underrated kind of avenue of discussion when it comes to this technology and how it is understood. And if you disaggregate some of this public opinion data, one of the interesting things that you see is that a lot of developing countries like Indonesia, China, according to last year's report, I don't know if you necessarily class China as developing, but countries that are perhaps outside of the Western sphere are much more kind of bullish and optimistic about AI technology. Whereas if you look at countries that are the most pessimistic about this technology, it's the United States, it's France, it's Germany, it's Netherlands. And that's very interesting to me. And I think it carries with it a lot of important implications, because in a lot of these democratic societies, the kind of concerns of voters are going to become manifested politically, and the ways in which policymakers think about using these tools can really impact and affect the development of the technology and how the technology becomes socially integrated.
So what do you suggest in general? What needs to be done to make sure that these numbers are, being reduced over time? I mean, what actors have to do what to address this particular?
I mean, I think there's I think it's a multifaceted issue. I think that, AI can be a very scary thing. I mean, if you're unfamiliar with the technology and you happen to open up ChatGPT and you see what it could do, I remember showing my dad the tool for the first time and he was quite shocked. I think it could be a very frightening thing, but I think that it's important to recognize and understand that, this technology is here, the kind of cat is out of the bag and it's not going anywhere. And I think now we kind of face the challenge of finding ways to kind of shape social incentives to ensure that the technology is well used and has very positive impacts and positive effects. And I think that's something that exists on a variety of fronts. So, giving kind of employers incentives to, if they're using AI, to potentially not necessarily automate jobs, but rather augment jobs, right? There's a lot of data in the report that talks about how workers can become substantially more productive if they use AI. If you have all this extra time, what are you going to do? You could either, stay at the same level of consumption or perhaps become even more productive and do more. So shaping those incentives and making sure that people have good reasons to do good things. And I think on that front as well, there's this kind of whole element of improving the responsibility of the ecosystem and the transparency of the ecosystem. I think sometimes AI can be a bit of a black box for the developers themselves, but certainly for the people using it. And if AI is going to be used as a tool to, decide credit decisions or decide mortgage decisions or whatnot, I think there has to be a level of transparency and people have to understand how these tools are working and how they're making their decisions. But I think that this is a problem really for policymakers and businesses to kind of think about. And AI is a tool that could do a lot of good. I work for High, whose core mission really is kind of this belief in the positive transformative effects of AI, but an understanding as well that to get to that level, it is super critical and super important that we, again, think about these incentives in the right way. So I think policymakers and business leaders really need to think, this is a good tool. How can we ensure that it's developed in a way to help others as much as possible?
Okay, very informative. Maybe another topic which I am being confronted quite a bit is most people, not us in the industry, don't still really know what AI really is in the first place. Yeah. They may have heard about ChatGPT, but in general, AI is still this thing that they cannot touch and see and understand. Are there data already out there where you can prove, or there is a trend where AI is actually not taking over the world? The robots are taking over. I'm talking Hollywood movies here, right? And the jobs are not being eliminated all across the board, rather than maybe being shifted or redefined, and what an individual can do to deal with that topic, that this fear is AI equals I'm losing my job in the future.
Yeah, so I think we're still, for anybody that's perhaps nervous or losing sleep over this, I think we're still far away from kind of robots taking over. There's a lot that these systems can do. There's also a lot that they cannot do. And we talk about this in the report, whether it's their propensity to hallucinate, whether it's their propensity to just sometimes be unfactual and untruthful. So these systems are good, but they still do have a lot of limitations. And I don't think there is a lot of reliable data at the moment as to what degree different employers are potentially automating functions as a result of AI or augmenting functions. But I think that the most important thing to kind of be cognizant and aware of is that, again, AI is here, and I think in a lot of different domains, you probably can't afford to put your hands over your eyes and pretend that it's not here. I think you need to kind of work to find ways to use this tool, to integrate the tool. And I think you could be surprised as to what this tool could actually do and how it could actually help you. And I think just kind of having this positive forward-thinking outlook can really give you a competitive edge in the marketplace. And that's something that I think people need to realize and understand. But we're still probably not at the stage where we have reliable data to kind of say, oh, companies are outsourcing jobs or companies are kind of automating jobs. But that's something that we're thinking about quite deeply at the index.
Okay. The last 12 months was really a lot about generative AI.
Yeah.
And companies that I wouldn't even think of, but they immediately integrated features into their product. Adobe did a great job. Autodesk did a great job. Salesforce did a great job. I mean, it just went so fast into their baseline of offerings and obviously the browsers and things like that with the chatbots. So that was an easy one. But going forward in the next, 12 months, where do you see the next big trend of progress in a very meaningful way initiated by AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still going to be progress in large language modeling. As I kind of alluded to earlier, I think the scaling laws will hold true. And I think that the next versions of the GPT-5s, the next Geminis, they're going to be better and stronger. I think the question is going to be how much better can they get, and is there kind of a ceiling to the scaling? I think one thing that I would kind of turn our attention towards is maybe perhaps developments that that people pay less attention to, because sometimes there's this grand hype around AI technology like LLMs. I think there's been a lot of really exciting research in the last year on agents and agentic AI. So these are, again, systems that can operate autonomously or semi-autonomously in environments. So imagine having a helper that could schedule meetings, perhaps a helper that could do your online shopping for you. So I think there is already a lot of evidence that researchers are using LLM architectures and LLM frameworks to create agents that can do some meaningful work in these environments. But I don't think we're still at the level of having super reliable autonomous systems, but that's something that researchers are really thinking about quite a bit. I also think there's been a lot of very exciting progress in the domain of robotics. I think, again, also aided by large language modeling, where now roboticists are training robots not only on robotic trajectory data, but also data of language. And you have robots that can engage in some type of reasoning tasks like stacking blocks based on colors or largest to smallest. And I think that's something that's very exciting and has a lot of potential. So I think it's easy to say that we're going to see improvements in generative technology. I mean, I think that's kind of generally held true. But I think it's also worth thinking about some of these under the radar improvements in agentic AI and robotic AI that people don't really talk about a lot, but for which there's been some really meaningful improvements.
Okay. Maybe last question, last topic on this report. Say a little bit about the dynamic between AI being created, being researched, between the research community and the industry. Yeah. That for me is another gap that needs to be, further analyzed, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
it's actually surprising.
Yeah, this is an incredibly important topic, and I think what you're referring to is that you can draw a distinction as to where these models are coming from. Are they coming from industry labs like Anthropic or OpenAI, or are they coming from universities like Stanford, Harvard, etc.? Historically, up until 2014, it was really the case that the majority of significant AI systems came out of academic institutions. Since then, the balance has really flipped up until the point where, as of 2023, according to AI Index results, there were 51 notable machine learning models that came from industry sectors compared to only 15 that came from academia. And so I think there's a couple questions to ask, like, why is this happening and why do we care? Why does this matter? Well, I think that the big explanation here is just cost. And this is something that we cover extensively in the report. And I actually don't know of any other report that has as accurate cost estimates as ours. But if you go to 2017, we estimate that the first transformer model, the model that kind of started the LLM craze, cost around $1,000 to train. Fast forward to GPT-4, Google's Gemini, we estimate that those models cost $80 to $190 million to train. So that's...
Say that again. Yeah, this is amazing.
$80 to $190 million to train. And that's okay. It's an obscene number. Yeah. It's an obscene figure. And I think that really is the big narrative here, that there is data to suggest that if you feed these systems more data, they do better. You need more computation if you want more data, and that costs more money. And there's really only a couple of actors in the world that could afford to build those kind of frontier systems. Now,
doesn't that, for me personally, that raises a lot of concerning?
For sure, absolutely, yeah. Because, I mean, I think on a high level, if you look historically at a lot of really important technological developments, whether it's gene editing, whether it's GPS, or whether it's some of the technology that was really foundational for the internet, a lot of these developments came out of university settings where professors were just kind of encouraged to pursue research they thought was interesting.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the kind of environment you need to really have innovative breakthroughs.
Exactly.
Because if you're concerned mostly about making a profit, your kind of view as to what you can research might be narrowed a little bit more. And I mean, I think you're already starting to see some policy responses. For example, in both the United States and the UK, some of the recent legislation that has been passed on AI has really been focused and centered on this idea of giving university and I think intentionally non-industry actors resources to try to compete a little bit with some of these industry players, whether it's access to broader data sets or just greater computational resources. But I mean, this does carry with it a lot of important implications. And as well, you know, you could do a lot of great things with these large language models. I mean, I talk about the science chapter early on, but there are so many kind of questions and domains in science that could really be answered with a tool like the state-of-the-art LLMs that you see right now. But unfortunately, you know, if it's the case that some of those LLMs are going to be behind closed doors or not openly accessible, that might really limit what researchers in the academic community are able to do. So that's an imbalance that we reported for the first time in last year's index. We see continuing in this year's report, and something that we're really going to have to pay attention to in the near future.
I'm glad we brought that up, because for me, that is a huge takeaway in regards to, I hope that the researchers who need to have the freedom to research are not flocking all the way into the industry and follow the money, right? And doing it for the wrong reason, so to speak.
And I think it's a balance as well. Like, I don't think it's right to say industry is bad, academia is good. And I mean, HI as an institution works a lot to nurture and build industry academic partnerships. And there's a lot of good work that happens in industry, and it's about finding a way for both of these actors to work together and to figure out what some of these actors can do that maybe the other can't. And I still think there's a lot of very valuable work to be done by academics. I mean, it's, I think, not realistic if you're an academic now to expect that you could build the next, you know, foundation model that's going to rival GPT-4, but maybe there's a new architecture that you could discover or develop that could be the backbone of the next, you know, wave of transformative AI. So there's still a lot of work to be done by academics. I just think the scale and the scope of that work has radically changed and evolved.
Okay. Oh, we could talk forever.
Yeah, we could.
There's so much to cover here.
Yeah.
I would say thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to traveling with you with the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
It will be wonderful. Any closing thoughts from you for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say in closing, other than urging all of the listeners to read the report front to back, but jokes aside, I would say, I think the big takeaway of the report this year is that people have an awareness that AI is here, whether it is people in business, people in the world of policy, or just regular civilians, and people are starting to respond. And I think when you look at the history of any technology, the way in which a technology is developed and integrated, I think often is a lot less about the technology itself, but rather how people react to it and how people think about it. And I think kind of we're now at a moment socially where people cannot really afford to just pretend that AI isn't here. I mean, it is here. It's making itself present. And I think we all need to think very critically about how we want to interact and engage with this technology to ensure that we can get the best of it and not the worst.
Nice closing statement. Nestor, as always, thank you very much. And let's have another session in a few months and see how the world has changed.
Yes, looking forward to it, Thomas.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Appreciate it.